The pristine, silver-embossed wedding invitation sat right at the top of my kitchen trash can, stained with coffee grounds. Just 8 hours earlier, my only son, David, had stood in my living room, looked me dead in the eye, and told me that if I cared about his happiness, I wouldn't show up to his wedding. He told me his bride, Clara, found my blue-collar background embarrassing to her high society family. I went to bed with a heart heavier than lead, feeling like a ghost in my own life. But then, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, and the phone on my nightstand began to ring. It was Clara. She was weeping, and her first word shattered everything I thought I knew. "Arthur, please, why are you doing this to us? Why you hate me so much that you refuse to walk me down the aisle?" Chapter 1, The Cold Ultimatum. My hands have always been rough. 40 years of working as a heavy machinery mechanic will do that to a man. They are covered in faint scars, embedded grease that never quite washes out, and knuckles that ache whenever a storm rolls over the valley. I always took pride in those hands because they paid for the roof over our heads, put food on the table, and put my son, David, through one of the finest business schools on the East Coast. But on that Tuesday afternoon, looking at my hands made me feel incredibly small. David had arrived unannounced. He didn't hug me when he walked through the door, nor did he look at a framed photograph of his late mother, Sarah, hanging in the entryway. He just paced around my small, immaculate living room, looking at the worn floral sofa and the vintage wooden radio, as if he were a health inspector looking for a reason to condemn the place. "Dad," he had said, his voice clipped and smooth, completely stripped of the working-class cadence he grew up with. "We need to talk about the wedding next month. Clara's mother is handling the guest list, and, well, things have gotten incredibly complicated." I remember smiling, reaching into my pocket to show him the vintage gold pocket watch I had restored for him, the one that belonged to his grandfather. "Don't you worry about the guest list. Son, just tell me what time I need to put on my suit. I've even been practicing my steps, so I don't trip on the dance floor." David stopped pacing. He didn't look at the watch. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, watching a stray leaf drift across the lawn. "That's just it, Dad. I think it's best if you don't come. In fact, I'm asking you not to." The room went entirely silent, save for the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. I felt the air leave my lungs, a familiar tightness gripping my chest. "What do you mean, David? I'm your father. Clara's family moves in different circles, Dad," he said quickly, the words tumbling out like a rehearsed speech. "Her mother, Evelyn, is very particular. They've invited senators, federal judges, investors from my new tech firm. Clara she's sensitive. She feels that your lifestyle, your house, your speech, it just doesn't fit the image we need to project. She's worried you'll make a scene or say the wrong thing to the investors. If you care about my future, David, you'll sit this one out. We'll do a private dinner later. Just us." He left shortly after, leaving the silver-embossed invitation on the kitchen table. He told me to keep it as a keepsake, but the sight of it burned my eyes. After an hour of sitting in the dark, I tossed it into the trash can, covered it with the morning's coffee grounds, and went to bed, wrapping myself in a cold, suffocating blanket of shame and betrayal. Chapter 2, The Shadows of the Past. To understand the depth of that wound, you have to understand what David and I had been through. My wife, Sarah, passed away from an aggressive illness when David was just 12 years old. In her final days, holding my calloused hand in the quiet room of the county hospital, she made me promise one thing. "Arthur, make sure our boy flies high. Don't let him get stuck in the mud of this town like we did. Give him wings." And I did. God knows I tried. For the next 15 years, my life was a blur of double shifts, grease-stained overalls, and the constant smell of diesel fuel. I woke up at 4 a.m. to work the main yard and took on independent repair jobs in my backyard garage until midnight. Every single dollar went into David's savings account. When he wanted to go to an elite summer camp, I sold my prized 1968 Mustang. When he needed a premium laptop for his university courses, I skipped my dental appointments and lived on canned soup for 3 months. Throughout his youth, David was a good boy. He used to sit on an overturned oil drum in the garage, watching me replace hydraulic lines, handing me wrenches before I even asked for them. We were a team. He would look at me with wide, adoring eyes and say, "When I grow up, Dad, I'm going to buy you a garage, so big you'll never have to lift a heavy wrench again." But something shifted when he left for graduate school in the city. The phone calls became shorter. The boy who used to share every detail of his life started talking in corporate jargon. He began speaking about scaling operations, angel investors, and legacy wealth. When he met Clara Vance a year ago, he stopped visiting altogether. He sent me a few photographs of her. She was a beautiful young woman with kind, dark eyes and a soft smile, holding a golden retriever on the lawn of what looked like a massive estate. David told me her family owned Vance Logistics, one of the largest shipping firms in the state. I was happy for him. I thought my Sarah was looking down from heaven, smiling because our boy had finally found his wings. I never imagined those wings would be used to fly as far away from me as possible. Chapter 3. The Changing Sun. As I lay in the dark of my bedroom, the memories of the past year played out like an agonizing movie. I recall the only time I had actually met Clara's mother, Evelyn Vance. It was at a high-end restaurant downtown, a place where the menus didn't even have prices on them. David had strictly instructed me to buy a brand new suit, which cost me a week's pension, and told me to let him do all the talking. Evelyn Vance was a woman sculpted from ice. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her jewelry clinked like tiny icicles, and her eyes scanned my new suit with immediate disapproval. When I tried to make conversation, mentioning a logistics issue I used to fix on the shipping docks, Evelyn had raised a single manicured eyebrow. "How fascinating, Mr. Blake," she had said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "It must be so comforting to work with your hands. So uncomplicated." My late husband always said that the world needs people who are content with simpler functions. David hadn't offended me. In fact, he had laughed, a nervous, eager to please laugh that turned my stomach. He immediately changed the subject to his new software startup, pitching it to Evelyn as if he were a stranger begging for a job. After that dinner, David called me to say that Evelyn found my energy a bit rustic, and that it would be better if future meetings were kept to a minimum until the wedding logistics were sorted out. I choked down my pride because I love my son. I convinced myself that this was just how wealthy people behaved, and that as long as David was happy, my hurt feelings didn't matter. But being barred from the wedding itself, being told that my presence would embarrass the girl he loved, that was a different kind of pain. It wasn't just a slight. It was a complete erasure of my existence. I felt like an old machine that had been run to its breaking point, only to be tossed into a scrap heap because its parts were no longer shiny enough for the showroom. Chapter 4. The ringing phone at midnight. The house was dead silent, except for the heavy rain that had started to tap against my bedroom window. I was staring at the ceiling, my mind running in endless, painful circles, when the sharp, shrill ring of the landline telephone cut through the dark. I blinked, looking at the glowing green digits of the alarm clock. 12:04 a.m. In my line of work, a phone call past midnight usually meant one of two things: an emergency at the municipal garage or a tragedy. My heart hammered against my ribs as I threw back the blankets, swung my stiff legs out of bed, and lifted the receiver. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse, thick with sleep and unshed tears. There was nothing but heavy, ragged breathing on the other end, followed by a sharp, stifled sob. "Arthur? Is that you?" The voice was female, trembling, and entirely unfamiliar at first. Then the realization hit me. It was Clara. "Clara?" I sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress, my hand tightening around the plastic receiver. "Clara, what's wrong? Is David okay? Has there been an accident?" "David is asleep in the guest room," she whispered, her voice cracking with intense, raw emotion. "Arthur, I had to call you from the old line in the study. I couldn't do this anymore. I've been crying for 3 days, and I needed to hear it from you. Why are you doing this to us?" I froze, the cold air of the bedroom suddenly feeling like ice water. "What am I doing, Clara? I don't understand." "Why did you tell David you aren't coming to the wedding?" she cried, trying to muffle her sobs so they wouldn't carry through the house. "He told me you called him this afternoon. He said you told him that our lifestyle is disgusting, that you refuse to sit in a room full of stuck-up rich people, and that you won't walk me down the aisle. Arthur, My father passed away 5 years ago. You know how much it meant to me when David said you wanted to take his place. Why do you hate me so much? Chapter 5. Connecting the pieces. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blood in my veins turned to liquid fire, and then completely cold. Clara, I said, my voice dropping into a low, steady tone that I used to use when a massive crane cable was about to snap on a job site. Listen to me very carefully. I want you to take a deep breath and hear my words. I never said those things to David. The line went completely dead for 5 long seconds. The only sound was a distant rumble of thunder outside. What? She whispered. David came to my house this afternoon. I said, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. He stood in my living room and told me that you and your mother didn't want me there. He said my hands were too dirty, my house was too small, and that I would embarrass your family in front of the investors. He asked me, for the sake of his future, to stay away. I heard a sharp intake of air from Clara's end of the line. No, that's not true. He told me you threw the invitation in his face. He said you called my mother a snob and said you wanted nothing to do with our elitist circus. The invitation is in my kitchen trash can right now, Clara. I said softly, a tear finally slipping down my weathered cheek. But I didn't throw it there out of anger at you. I put it there because my son told me I wasn't wanted. I didn't want to look at it and remember that I'd failed as a father. Oh my God, Clara gasped. I could hear her pacing, her bare feet patting softly against what must have been a hardwood floor. Oh my God, Arthur, why would he do this? He's been telling my mother that you're a bitter, reclusive man who hates the city. He told my Uncle Julian that you refused to sign the family registry for the wedding. He's lying to everyone. Why would he do that, Clara? I asked, the mechanic in me automatically looking for the broken gear, the hidden malfunction in my own son's mind. What is he trying to keep apart? I don't know, she cried, her voice trembling violently. But we need to find out. Arthur, my Uncle Julian and David have been working on a massive financial merger between Vance Logistics and David's tech company. They've been spending hours in the study locked away. There's something wrong here. Something very, very wrong. Chapter 6. The Secret Meeting. We talked for another hour in the dead of night, spinning a web of questions with no answers. By the time we hung up, we had a plan. Clara was going to tell David she was spending the day with her bridal party, but instead, she was driving out to my town. We couldn't risk David seeing us together in the city, so we chose a quiet, faded dine on the old county highway, a place where the truck drivers go and the booths are deep enough to hide in. I arrived 30 minutes early. I sat in the corner booth, staring into a black cup of coffee, watching the rain stream down the neon-lit glass. When the door chimed, Clara walked in. She looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes, wearing a simple hooded sweatshirt and jeans, completely different from the glamorous girl in the photographs. She sat down opposite me, her hands shaking as she pulled off her hood. Thank you for coming, Arthur. He's my son, Clara. If he's losing his mind or his soul, I needn't know why. I said straight out. Clara leaned forward, her voice a hurried whisper. Yesterday, after we spoke, I stayed up and started looking through David's briefcase while he was in the shower. I know it's terrible, but I had to. Arthur, I found a legal document. It's a power of attorney and a property deed disclosure form. It had your name at the top and your signature at the bottom. I frowned, my brow furrowing. I haven't signed a legal document for David since he bought his car 4 years ago. Clara pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket and slid it across the sticky table. It was a photocopy of the deed to my property, the house, the land, and a large attached workshop where I spent my retirement doing custom woodworking. At the bottom was a signature, Arthur Blake. I stared at it, the loops of the sharp cross of the T. It looked exactly like my handwriting, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had never held the pen that marked that paper. It's a forgery, I whispered, the cold reality settling deep into my bones. He forged my signature. But why? This house is only worth a couple $100,000. To a family like yours, that's pocket change. It's not about the value of the house, Arthur, Clara said, her eyes wide with fear. It's about what's under the house. 2 months ago, my Uncle Julian's construction division quietly ran a geological survey along the old county rail line that borders your property. They found a massive untapped natural limestone and granite deposit right beneath your acreage. The state is planning to build a new highway bypass through there next year. If the owner of that land refuses to sell, the project is delayed. But if the owner sells to Vance Logistics now, the state will buy from us for millions. Chapter 7. Draining the well. The pieces of the machine were beginning to click into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. David told my mother that you were completely uncooperative, Clara continued, her tears flowing freely now. He said you were a bitter old man who would rather let the land rot than let our family make a profit. He convinced my mother and uncle that he could handle you, but that you had to be kept completely away from the wedding and the family functions, so you wouldn't find out about the development deal. And if I showed up at the wedding, I realized, the truth washing over me like a wave of nausea, I'd meet your Uncle Julian, I'd meet the lawyers, I'd talk about my land, my workshop, and the whole lie would collapse. Exactly, Clara said, grabbing my rough hand with both of her small ones. David isn't just protecting his corporate image. Arthur, he's committing a crime. He's stealing from his own father to secure his partnership in my family's firm. He told my mother that the land was his inheritance and that you had already signed it over to him as a wedding gift. I sat there, looking out at the gray morning light breaking through the rain clouds. The son I had sacrificed my youth for, the boy I had worked until my knuckles bled protect, had looked at my life, my home, the memories of his mother, and put a price tag on them. He had traded his father for a seat at a wealthy man's table. I need to go to the bank, Clara, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. If he forged my signature on property deed, I need to see what else he's touched. 30 minutes later, I was standing in the small brick building of the First National Bank in my hometown. The manager, a woman named Martha, who had known my late wife, looked at me with a heavy, sympathetic expression when I asked to check my retirement and savings balances. She printed out a ledger and slid it across the counter. My retirement fund, the money I had saved over 40 years to ensure I would never be a burden to my son, was gone. Over the last 6 months, a series of electronic transfers had systematically drained the account. The total balance was exactly $84.12. David had a joint access card from years ago, one we had set up when he was in college in case of an emergency. He had cleaned it out completely. Chapter 8. The Shadow Partner. I stood on the sidewalk outside the bank, the cold wind biting through my jacket. I didn't feel angry yet. The shock was too dense, a heavy, suffocating fog that made it hard to breathe. He hadn't just banned me from his wedding. He had ruined me. He had taken my past, my present, and my future, leaving me with a worthless bank account and a forged deed to a home I no longer legally owned. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Clara. Meet me at the public library in the city. Uncle Julian's office just sent a courier to David with the final merger contract. They are signing it tonight at a private dinner at the Vance estate. We need to see what's in that contract. I climbed into my old, reliable pickup truck. The engine turned over with a familiar, mechanical roar, the only thing in my life right now that worked the way it was supposed to. I drove toward the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. At the downtown library, Clara met me in the back of the archives section. She had a digital tablet in her hands. As a member of the Vance Family Trust, she had remote access to some of the corporate servers, though she had never used it until today. Look at this, Arthur, she whispered, pointing to a scanned document on the screen. It was a confidential addendum to the merger between Vance Logistics and David's tech startup, Aegis Systems. The terms were brutal. David wasn't becoming a partner. He was selling the forged rights to my land to Julian Vance in exchange for a $5 million buyout and a title as vice president. But there was a catch. The contract stated that the buyout would only be triggered after the marriage was legally finalized and the property deed was transferred to Vance Logistics. Julian is using David, Clara whispered, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and realization. My uncle doesn't care about David's software. He wants that land bypass, And he knows my mother would never allow a corrupt land grab under the family name if she knew the truth. Julian told David that if he didn't deliver the land before the wedding, the merger was off, and David's company would go bankrupt. David is deep in debt. Arthur. He borrowed millions from private lenders to set up his fancy city office and buy his luxury car. If this deal fails, he goes to prison for financial fraud. Chapter 9. Following the paper trail. I leaned heavily against the wooden library table, looking at the glowing screen. The tragedy of the situation was fully clear now. My son wasn't just a greedy monster. He was a desperate coward. He had built a house of cards in the high-stakes world of city finance, trying to play the part of a wealthy mogul to impress Clara's family. When the wind started to blow his house down, he decided to tear down his father's house to use the bricks. He was trapped, I said softly. That doesn't justify what he did to you, Arthur, Clara said fiercely, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it. He stole your life savings. He forged your name. He lied to me. He lied to my mother, and he tried to discard the man who gave him everything. He doesn't deserve your pity. I'm not pitying him, Clara, I said, looking her in the eye. I'm fixing the problem. In my shop, when a gear is stripped, you don't just grease it and hope for the best. You have to remove it, look at the damage, and replace it. David thinks he's played a flawless game because he thinks an old mechanic from a valley doesn't know how to fight back. We spent the next 3 hours printing out every document Clara could pull from the server. The geological surveys, the forged deed, the hidden corporate addendums, and the bank transfer records showing my money moving directly into David's corporate account. As the stack of papers grew, I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The pain of the betrayal was still there, a deep, tearing ache in my chest, but was now overlaid with profound sense of duty. Sarah had told me to give our boy wings, but wings without a moral compass are just a tool for a catastrophic fall. It was time for me to be his father one last time, even if it meant being the architect of his ruin. Chapter 10. The confrontation that wasn't. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the exclusive neighborhood where David's luxury apartment building stood. I parked my old truck across the street, a battered blue eyesore among a sea of pristine sports cars. I sat there in the dark, watching the entrance. At around 7:30 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled up, the rear door opened, and Julian Vance stepped out. He was a tall, sharply dressed man in his late 50s, with graying temples and a calculating smile. A moment later, David emerged from the building. My son looked sharp. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, his hair perfectly styled, expensive gold watch gleaming on his wrist, undoubtedly bought with the retirement money he had stolen from me. He greeted Julian with a firm, practiced handshake and a wide, confident smile. They spoke for a few moments on the sidewalk, Julian patting David on the back like a proud mentor, before they both climbed into the sedan and drove away toward the Vance estate for their celebratory dinner. I watched the red taillights of the sedan disappear into the city traffic. My hand rested on the manila folder on my passenger seat, the folder containing the evidence of their fraud. I could have followed them. I could have burst into that wealthy estate, thrown the papers on the dinner table, and caused a scene, but I knew that would play right into their hands. Evelyn Vance would have me removed by security. David would claim I was a disgruntled, mentally unstable old man, and Julian's corporate lawyers would tie me up in legal red tape until the wedding was over and the land was transferred. No, a good mechanic doesn't strike the machine with a sledgehammer while it's running full speed. You wait until it's in the designated bay, fully exposed, where one precise turn of the wrench can dismantle the entire apparatus. I turned the key in my truck, shifted into drive, and headed back to my quiet, empty home to prepare for the wedding day. Chapter 11. Clara's Discovery. 2 weeks passed. To David, everything appeared to be going exactly according to plan. I remained silent, never calling him, never protesting. I let him believe that his cold ultimatum had worked, that his old, broken father was sitting at home in the valley, nursing his wounded pride in silence. But behind the scenes, Clara and I were in constant communication. She played her part beautifully. She went to the dress fittings, smiled for society photographers, and sat through dinners with her mother and uncle all while carrying a mountain of burning secrets. 3 days before the wedding, Clara made a discovery that sealed David's fate. She called me from a secure payphone near her bridal boutique, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and resolve. "Arthur, I found the final prenuptial agreement," she said, her breath catching. "David and Uncle Julian changed it at the last minute without telling me or my mother's personal attorney. There's a hidden clause. If I file for divorce for any reason within the first 3 years, all of my personal shares in Vance Logistics, the ones my father left directly to me, are automatically transferred to Aegis Systems as liquid assets to protect the merger." The cold brutality of the plan was breathtaking. David wasn't just stealing my land. He was setting up a trap to systematically drain Clara's inheritance if she ever discovered his deception and tried to leave him. He had married her for her name, her status, and her money, guided by her corrupt uncle who wanted total control of the family firm. "They aren't just signing a marriage license, Arthur," Clara said, a hard, dangerous edge finally entering her soft voice. "They are signing a warrant for my financial execution. I'm done crying, Arthur. I'm ready." "Put on your dress, Clara," I told her, my voice echoing with the weight of 40 years of hard, honest living. "Stand at the altar. I'll be there to walk you down the aisle, just like we planned. But we aren't going to a wedding. We're going to a trial." Chapter 12. The trap is set. The morning of the wedding arrived, bright, clear, and utterly heartless. The sun shone down on the manicured lawns of the St. Jude Episcopal Church, an historic stone cathedral in the city's most affluent district. Valet drivers in white gloves were already parking luxury vehicles, and women in expensive silk dresses were floating up the stone steps. In my small bedroom in the valley, I stood before the mirror. I wore my old black suit, the one I had bought for Sarah's funeral. It was slightly loose on me now, but it was clean, pressed, and honest. I adjusted my tie with steady fingers. In my inside breast pocket, resting right over my heart, was a thick manila envelope containing complete, documented truth. I looked at the photograph of Sarah on my nightstand. "I tried to give him wings, Sarah," I whispered to the empty room. "But today, I have to bring him back down to earth. Pray for our boy." I didn't drive my old pickup truck to the church. I didn't want to alert David before the trap snapped shut. Instead, I hired a professional town car service using the last bit of cash I had hidden in a coffee can in my workshop. As the car pulled up to the Grand Cathedral, I saw the security guards at the gate, checking names against a master list handled by Evelyn Vance's personal staff. I knew my name wasn't on that list. In fact, David had likely given them strict orders to turn me away if a rough-looking old man in an outdated suit tried to enter. But I wasn't going to the front doors. Clara had given me the key to the rear entrance, the private vestry door where the bridal party prepared. I walked around the stone perimeter of the church, my polished shoes crunching softly on the gravel path, completely invisible to the high society crowd gathering in the grand courtyard. Chapter 13. The eve of the storm. I stepped into the cool, dimly lit stone hallway of the church's rear wing. The air smelled of old wood, incense, and expensive perfume. From the main sanctuary, I could hear the deep, resonant chords of the pipe organ warming up, a beautiful, haunting sound that made the stone walls vibrate. I walked silently down the corridor until I found the door labeled Bride's Room. I knocked softly. The door swung open instantly, and Clara stood there. She was breathtaking. Her white lace gown trailed onto the floor, and a delicate veil hung over her face. But beneath the tulle, her eyes were sharp, clear, and completely devoid of fear. Her mother, Evelyn, was standing behind her, adjusting a strand of pearls around Clara's neck. When Evelyn saw me, she froze, her face instantly tightening into an expression of aristocratic outrage. "Mr. Blake?" Evelyn hissed, stepping forward as if to block me from entering. "What on earth are you doing here?" David explicitly told us you refused to attend. He said you were boycotting the ceremony. Security. "Keep your voice down, Evelyn," I said, my voice quiet but carrying a weight that made her stop in her tracks. I stepped into the room and closed a heavy oak door behind me, locking it with a soft click. "Arthur belongs here, Mother," Clara said, her voice steady and calm. She reached out and took my hand, her white lace glove contrasting sharply with my rough, scarred knuckles. He is the only man in this room who actually cares about my future. Have you both lost your minds? Evelyn gasped, looking between us. The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. The governor is sitting in the third row. David is waiting at the altar. David is waiting for a payday, Evelyn, I said, pulling a manila envelope from my breast pocket and laying it on the vanity table right next to Clara's bridal bouquet. And it's time you see exactly what you're buying. Chapter 14, The Uninvited Guest. Evelyn Vance stared at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. What is this nonsense? David is a brilliant young man. He's merging his firm with our logistics division. He's saved our northern expansion project by securing the land rights. He secured nothing, Mother, Clara interrupted, her voice cutting through the room like a glass blade. Open it. Read it. Look at the signature on the property transfer. With trembling, manicured hands, Evelyn opened the envelope. She pulled out the documents. I stood in silence as her eyes scanned the geological surveys, the forged deed, and then the bank statements showing my life savings being transferred into David's corporate accounts to pay off his luxury car and his private debts. As she read, the color completely drained from her face. The icy composure she had worn like armor for decades began to crack. This can't be. Julian told me this land was acquired legally through a private estate sale. He told me David's father was an uncooperative man who had to be bought out through a third-party trust. Julian lied to you, Mother, Clara said, stepping close to her. Julian and David altered my prenuptial agreement to steal my inheritance if I ever found out. They are using this wedding to finalize a corporate theft. If that contract is processed tomorrow, our family name will be dragged through a federal fraud investigation. David didn't ban his father because he was embarrassed of him. He banned him because his father is the victim of his crime. Evelyn sank into a velvet chair, the papers fluttering in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a sudden, profound shame. Mr. Blake, I don't know what to say. You thought I was simple, Evelyn, I said softly, looking down at her. You thought because my hands are rough and I work in a garage, I don't know the value of honor. But I raised my boy to be an honest man. Somewhere along the way, he forgot the lessons I taught him. Now I have to finish the job. Chapter 15, Walking into the Lion's Den. The heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary swung open. The pipe organ swelled into the triumphant, traditional chords of the bridal march. The entire congregation, 300 people in tailored suits and silk gowns, stood up in unison, turning their heads toward the back of the church to see the bride. At the front of the altar stood David. He looked magnificent, a picture of youthful success and confidence, a proud smile on his face. Next to him stood Julian Vance, smiling broadly, looking like a man who was about to inherit an empire. But as the crowd turned, a collective gasp echoed to the massive stone cathedral. Clara wasn't walking alone, nor was she walking with a hired escort. She was walking down the long, white-carpeted aisle with her arm tightly looped through mine. I walked with my head held high, my old black suit sharp and clean, my heavy, rhythmic steps echoing against the stone floor. I didn't look at the wealthy socialites or the politicians staring at me in confusion. I kept my eyes locked on my son. The smile on David's face didn't just fade. It vanished instantly, replaced by a mass of sheer, unadulterated terror. His skin turned a sickly, ash-gray color. His eyes went wide as he saw me walking toward him. Holding the hand of the woman, he thought he had successfully isolated from the truth. He took a half-step back, his hands trembling against his sides, his eyes darting toward the side exits like a trapped animal. Next to him, Julian Vance's smile hardened into a dangerous, icy glare. He glared at me, then at Clara, his hand instinctively tightening around the small leather folder containing the final merger documents. Chapter 16, The Truth Takes the Stage. We reached the front of the altar. The pipe organ music cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging over the entire congregation. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. The minister cleared his throat, looking confusedly between David, Clara, and myself. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? I stepped forward, releasing Clara's arm. I looked directly into David's eyes, Seeing the boy who used to sit on the oil drum in my garage, now hidden beneath a layer of expensive fabric and cheap lies. I am here to give the bride something she actually needs, Reverend, I said, my voice clear, resonant, and carrying to the very back row of the cathedral. And I am here to give my son the one thing he's been running from. Dad, what are you doing? David whispered, his voice cracking, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. Get out of here. You're ruining my life. Please. You ruined your own life, David, the day you put a price tag on your mother's memory and your father's signature, I said out loud, completely exposing him to the room. Julian Vance stepped forward, trying to intervene, his voice sharp and authoritative. Security, remove this man. He is trespassing and disrupting a private family event. The only people leaving this church in handcuffs, Julian, are you and my son, I said, pulling the duplicate legal file from my jacket and handing it directly to a man sitting in the front row, a man Clara had privately contacted the night before, the district attorney for the county, who happened to be an old acquaintance of her late father. Chapter 17, The Exposure. The district attorney opened the folder immediately, his professional eyes scanning the forged deed and the bank fraud summaries. Within seconds, his expression transformed from curiosity to grim determination. He stood up, looking at two plainclothes officers sitting a few rows back, and gave a sharp, decisive nod. The congregation erupted into a low, frantic murmur of whispers. David looked at the folder, then at the district attorney, and then at me. The realization that his entire world had collapsed in a single moment hit him like a physical blow. He fell to his knees right there on the altar steps, his custom Italian suit crumpling beneath him. "Dad, please," he sobbed, the corporate posture completely shattering, leaving nothing but a scared, broken boy. I was in debt. They were going to destroy my company. Julian told me it was the only way. He said you'd never know. He said you didn't need the money anyway. I didn't need the money, David, I said, a deep, heavy sadness settling into my chest as I looked down at him. I needed an honest son. I would have given you my house, my land, and every drop of blood in my body if you had just asked me with honesty. But you chose to steal it. You chose to cast me out like rubbish. Julian Vance tried to walk away, slipping toward the vestry door, but the two plainclothes officers met him at the exit, blocking his path and showing their badges. "Julian Vance, David Blake," the district attorney said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "You are both required to accompany us to the station for questioning regarding grand larceny, identity theft, and corporate fraud. The ceremony is over." Chapter 18, The Fall of the House of Cards. The Grand Cathedral emptied out in a matter of minutes, the high society guests fleeing the scandal like rats from a sinking ship. The flowers, the expensive silk ribbons, and the pristine white carpet were left abandoned in the quiet stone hall. I sat on the front wooden pew, my hands resting on my knees. Clara sat beside me, her beautiful white veil pulled back, her hand resting on my shoulder. Evelyn Vance stood near the altar, looking at the empty space where her brother and her future son-in-law had just been led away in restraints. The justice was swift, clean, and devastating. Over the next few weeks, the investigation revealed the full extent of the rot. Julian Vance was stripped of his position in Vance Logistics and faced multiple federal charges for land fraud and embezzlement. David's tech company went completely bankrupt, its assets seized to pay off his massive debts. Because of the evidence Clara and I had gathered, my retirement fund was legally frozen and eventually restored to my account. The forged property deed was declared null and void by a circuit court judge. My home, my workshop, and the land my Sarah had loved remained mine. David was offered a plea deal due to his lack of prior criminal history, but he was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security correctional facility for forgery and grand theft. The day before he was transported to the facility, I visited him at the county jail. We sat in a small, sterile room divided by a pane of thick glass. He looked thin, his expensive haircut gone, wearing a standard orange jumpsuit. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Are you happy now, Dad? You got your house back. You got your money back. And you destroyed my future." "I didn't destroy your future, David," I said to the microphone, my voice breaking with an old, deep sorrow. "I saved your soul. If you had succeeded in that lie, you would have spent the rest of your life building a world on a foundation of rot. You would have destroyed Clara. You would have destroyed yourself, and you would have died a wealthy, empty shell. 3 years in a cell is a heavy price to pay, son, but it's a chance to learn how to build something with honest hands again. Chapter 19, Rebuilding from the Ashes. 6 months later, the rain was tapping softly against my workshop window in the valley. The smell of fresh pine shavings and wood stain filled the air, the clean, comforting sense of my retirement. The heavy machinery yard was a thing of the past, but my hands were still busy. I was working on a small hand-carved rocking chair, smoothing out the armrest with a piece of fine-grit sandpaper until it would felt as soft as silk. The workshop door chimed, and Clara walked in. She was wearing a simple wool sweater and boots, her dark hair tied back. She carried 2 mugs of hot coffee, steaming in the cool autumn air. She had severed ties with the city social scene, taken over a modest, honest branch of her family's shipping business, and moved into a quiet house just a few miles down the road from me. "How's the chair coming along, Arthur?" she asked, smiling as she handed me a mug. "It's getting there, Clara," I said, blowing a layer of sawdust off the wood. "A good piece of furniture takes time. You can't rush the grain. If you try to force it, the wood splits, and you have to start all over again." She sat down on an old wooden stool, watching me work. We didn't talk about David. His letters from the facility arrived every month now. They were short, filled with remorse, and for the first time in 10 years, they sounded like they were written by the boy who used to sit on the oil drum. He was working in the facility's maintenance shop, learning how to repair small engines. He was finally getting his hands dirty. We had survived the storm. The machine of our family had been broken, its gears stripped by greed and pride, but we had pulled it apart, cleaned out the debris, and rebuilt something new from the wreckage. Chapter 20, A New Dawn. As the sun began to set over the valley, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and violet, I walked out of the workshop and stood on the porch of my small, honest house. The land beneath my feet, the limestone and granite that wealthy men had tried to steal, felt solid, permanent, and true. I looked at my rough, grease-stained hands. They didn't make me feel small anymore. They were the hands of a man who had kept his promise to his wife, who had protected an innocent woman from a lifetime of deception, and who had shown his son that a life built on a lie will always collapse under the weight of the truth. I knew that my path ahead would be quiet. I would continue to work in my shop, continue to share Sunday dinners with Clara, and continue to accept the monthly letters from my son until the day he walks out of those gates and comes home to help me fix up the old pickup truck. We don't need high society circles, grand cathedrals, or millions of dollars to be whole. We just need to be able to look at our reflection in the mirror at midnight and know that our name is clean, our heart is honest, and our foundations are built on something that money can never buy. The grandest structures in this world mean nothing if they are built on a foundation of deception. We spend our lives striving for success, wealth, and the approval of others, often forgetting that the true value of a person is measured by the honesty of their actions and the integrity of their heart. Never be ashamed of a simple life or a blue-collar background. Smooth hands often hide a rough soul, while rough hands are the mark of an honest life. When the world demands that you discard your roots to climb higher, remember that a tree without deep, honest roots will always be the first to fall when the wind begins to blow. Protect your family, guard the truth, and never trade your integrity for a seat at a table where you have to deny who you are.